Before watching, please press like to support me in producing more stories. This helps in spreading the video and reaching more people. Thank you for your support and enjoy watching. It was a long drive up to the Escalante National Forest, Utah. Not the sort of place most folks visit by accident. This place is for the intentional, those looking for solitude or maybe something more sinister. I was just doing my job, responding to a call about 2 campers that hadn't returned in 5 days. No one should have been out here that long without checking in. And now, it was my problem. My name is Dennis Kane. I've been a park ranger for about, well, longer than I care to admit. Let's just say I've seen my fair share of oddities. People who forget how compasses work, the type who think their city instincts are enough to survive in the wild. But Escalante isn't kind to anyone. It's the kind of place that chews people up and spits out bones. The year was 1993, but I'd argue it doesn't matter what year you come up here. This place is stuck in time. I've been around enough that the wilderness doesn't spook me, but there was something about that drive into the forest that made my skin crawl. The radio kept cutting out, static, like something was interfering with it. When I finally pulled up to the ranger station, I was greeted by the kind of silence that feels wrong. No wind, no birds, just stillness. Mark, another ranger, was supposed to be working this section of the forest, but I hadn't heard from him since the campers went missing. No one had. He was supposed to keep an eye on the place, especially since the area had reports of mountain lions recently. But Mark was a ghost. I grabbed my gear, GPS, map, and rifle. Now, I don't usually carry a rifle unless there's a reason, but something told me this wasn't going to be a routine search. I strapped it over my shoulder and locked up the truck. The trailhead into the deeper part of the forest was right at the edge of the parking lot, a thin path that seemed to stretch forever into the woods. And there was that stillness again, the kind that makes your chest tighten. I'm not a guy prone to nerves, but even I could admit something was off. I took a deep breath, muttered a joke to myself about how my ex would probably love to see me eaten by a cougar, and started walking. The hike was steady, but the silence pressed in more with every step. Not a single chirp, rustle, or snap of twigs, just the sound of my own boots crunching on dirt. An hour into the hike, I found what I was looking for, a campsite. The fire pit was cold, the tent still set up, but it looked like someone had torn through the place. Clothes were scattered, half a sleeping bag dragged into the brush, and the tent was clawed at, like something had taken its anger out on it. I pulled out my radio, tried to call Mark again, but just got more static. Damn thing. It was around then I heard it. Finally, a sound. A faint rustling, like something moving in the underbrush. I turned, scanning the tree line, rifle half raised. But whatever it was, it stayed just out of sight. Now, I've hunted before. I've seen plenty of animals stalk the unaware, but this didn't feel right. I swear I could feel it watching me. I crept toward the sound, rifle ready, my boots barely making a noise. As I pushed through the brush, I found the source of the rustling. A bag. One of the campers' bags lying in the dirt, half open. There was blood on it. Not a lot, just enough to make my pulse quicken. I turned to keep moving when the ground under me gave way. I stumbled, losing my footing, and landed hard. Pain shot up my leg, but as I tried to stand, I saw what I had fallen into. It wasn't a hole, it was a pit, about 6 feet deep. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what was in the pit with me. Bones, human bones. 2 skeletons still partially clothed. One with a necklace that looked too fresh to belong to anyone who died years ago. My stomach twisted. I've seen death before, sure, but this felt different. There was something intentional about it. Clean, precise. I scrambled out of the pit, wincing as pain shot up my leg again. I needed to get back to the ranger station, fast. Whatever killed these people wasn't a mountain lion, and it sure as hell wasn't done. As I started back down the trail, something shifted behind me. A quick movement, too fast to be human. I turned just in time to see it. Large, low to the ground. Something that looked like a mix between a bear and a wolf. But it wasn't either. It moved like it had been watching me for hours, waiting for the perfect moment. My rifle was up, finger on the trigger. But before I could fire, it was gone. disappearing into the trees. I stood there for what felt like minutes, my heart hammering, waiting for it to come back. But it didn't. I started running, fast as my bum leg could carry me anyway. I wasn't going to wait around for whatever that thing was to decide I was next on the menu. The path blurred by, my boots slamming into the ground as I pushed through the pain. The only thing in my head was getting back to the truck, locking myself in and radioing for help. But when I reached the ranger station, something was wrong. The door was open, hanging on its hinges like someone had ripped it off. I stepped inside, rifle raised, scanning the room. No sign of Mark. No sign of anyone. Just more of that damned silence. Then I saw it. Mark's body, or what was left of it, torn apart like a rag doll, blood smeared across the floor. My stomach heaved, but I forced it down. I couldn't afford to fall apart now. I had to think. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't far. And it was smart. It had been watching me, maybe waiting for the right moment. My only chance was to get back to the truck, grab the emergency flare, and call for help. I turned to leave when I heard it. Footsteps. Not heavy, but deliberate, coming from just outside the station. I backed up, pressing myself against the wall, rifle clutched in my hands. The door creaked open, just a crack, and through it I saw something that made my blood run cold. The creature wasn't alone. There were more of them. 2, maybe 3, all moving silently through the trees like shadows. I didn't wait. I fired through the door, the sound of the shot deafening in the small room. The creatures scattered, disappearing into the forest, but I knew they weren't gone. They were hunting me. I didn't have much time. I grabbed the flare gun, stuffed extra rounds into my pockets, and bolted for the truck. I could hear them in the trees, circling, waiting for me to slip up, but I didn't. Not yet. I reached the truck, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking. Just as I got the door open, one of the creatures lunged from the tree line, slamming into the side of the truck with a force that rocked the whole vehicle. I fired the flare gun straight into its face. The creature let out a high-pitched scream, stumbling back, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't dying, just angry. I jumped into the truck, slammed the door, and floored it, tearing down the trail with the sound of those things chasing me. I radioed for backup, but the static drowned out my words. I wasn't sure if anyone heard me. It didn't matter. I wasn't going to stop until I hit the main road. When I finally broke through the tree line and hit asphalt, I slammed the brakes, gasping for breath. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the wheel. I was alive. Barely. Later, the authorities found Mark's body, along with the campers. They called it a tragic animal attack, but I know what I saw. I don't care what they say. Those things, they're still out there hunting, waiting for the next poor soul to wander too deep into Escalante. I've always hated hiking, to be honest. It's ironic, I know, given that I've been working as a park ranger for nearly 8 years now. The year was 2013, and my post was in Great Sand Dunes National Park in southern Colorado. Not your typical forested terrain, just vast rolling dunes that stretched endlessly. I guess that's why I thought this job would be different. Who gets lost in a desert, right? My name is Derek Trenton, by the way. I got into this line of work mainly because I wanted to avoid the desk job my dad pushed me toward. You could say it was a way of rebelling against the family business, real estate development. I just didn't want to sell overpriced houses to people who'd complain about countertops. Besides, my sense of humor and love for the outdoors seemed like a better fit for a gig like this, even if it came with fewer zeros on my paycheck. Anyway, I was on a routine patrol, checking for litter, lost tourists, the usual stuff. We don't get a ton of action here. Maybe a dehydration case or two during the summer months. This particular day was different, though. I got a radio call from Lisa, one of the newer rangers. She sounded rattled, which was unusual for her. She's usually the tough, no-nonsense type. "Derek, you near the Eastern Ridge?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Yeah, just past the main dune about 10 minutes ago. Why, what's up?" "Got a report of a missing hiker. Family says he didn't come back to the campsite last night." Typical city folks. Probably wandered off to take pictures and got himself stuck. I'll swing by. As I made my way toward the ridge, I figured it was going to be the usual routine. Find some guy with a twisted ankle, hand him a bottle of water, and send him on his merry way. Except when I got there, no one was around. The family had gone back to the visitor center, probably thinking the hiker would find his way back. The weird part was the trail of footprints in the sand. They weren't just hiker prints. There were some deeper, wider imprints next to them. I'm no expert tracker, but I know what human feet look like, and these weren't it. Now here's the thing about me. I've always been the skeptical type. You know, the guy who laughs at conspiracy theories and rolls his eyes at Bigfoot sightings. But when I looked at those tracks, something was off. They reminded me of alligator prints, except bigger. Much bigger. At this point, I was more intrigued than concerned. Maybe some pranksters were trying to spook tourists. I followed the trail, which led deeper into a narrow canyon on the east side of the park. This part of the dunes isn't accessible to the public, mostly because it's easy to get lost, and rescue teams hate navigating it. As I moved farther in, the air changed. Heavier, like walking into a room filled with damp, cold air despite the heat of the desert. I brushed it off as a trick of the terrain. There was an odd smell, too. Something like rotting meat mixed with wet earth. I radioed back to Lisa. "Hey, I'm at the canyon. Tracks lead here, but I don't see anyone yet." "Be careful, Derek. The family said he's been gone for almost a full day." "I'll be fine. Probably just twisted his ankle or something. You know how it goes." No sooner had I said that than I noticed something ahead. A faint shape in the sand, partially hidden by the curve of the canyon wall. As I got closer, I saw what it was. A boot. One of those high-end hiking boots. The kind with extra support for people who take themselves way too seriously. Except there was no hiker attached to it. The boot was upright, like someone had just stepped out of it mid-stride. No blood, no signs of a struggle. Just a boot. I looked around, my pulse starting to pick up. There were more tracks leading deeper into the canyon, but the prints were messed up, like something had dragged itself along with the hiker. I'm not proud of it, but I thought about turning back right then. The smart thing would have been to call for backup, wait for a team to come in and do a thorough search. But I'm stubborn, and besides, it's just a missing hiker, right? The canyon got narrower as I moved forward, the walls closing in, almost suffocating. Then, just as I was about to give up and head back, I heard it, low, rhythmic breathing. Not the kind a human makes when they're scared or tired. This was deep, controlled, like an animal stalking prey. I froze, listening. At first I thought maybe it was a bear, even though we don't get them this far south. My hand instinctively went to the knife on my belt. I didn't carry a gun, never saw the need, but at that moment I regretted that decision. I crouched down, moving as quietly as I could. The breathing stopped. I wasn't sure if that made me feel better or worse. My eyes darted around the canyon, trying to spot whatever was lurking. Then I saw it. A shadow moving along the wall, long and misshapen. I don't know how else to describe it other than it looked wrong, like it didn't belong there. I stayed low, my breath catching in my throat as the shadow moved closer, revealing a shape that I could only describe as animal-like. But it wasn't any animal I'd ever seen before. Its limbs were too long, the body hunched, like it had evolved for crawling more than walking upright. The head. God, the head looked like a mix between a wolf and something much worse. My rational brain tried to make sense of it, tried to convince me it was some wild animal. But deep down I knew it wasn't. I don't know how long I stared at it, too scared to move. Then it noticed me. Its eyes, well, whatever was in its face that passed for eyes, locked onto mine. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs didn't cooperate. It moved toward me with an eerie grace, almost silently, like it was used to stalking things that never got away. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of teeth too sharp for anything I'd ever seen in nature. That's when I knew this thing wasn't just an animal. It was something much worse, something that didn't belong here. I'm not sure what snapped me out of it, but I finally bolted, sprinting back the way I came. My heart pounded in my chest, and I didn't look back, not even when I heard it following. Its movements impossibly fast, like it wasn't bound by the same rules of physics that the rest of us were. I knew I wasn't going to make it out of the canyon. The narrow walls felt like they were closing in, trapping me, forcing me deeper into the maze. That's when I saw another figure up ahead, a man waving frantically at me to follow him. It had to be the missing hiker, right? He was limping, dragging his leg behind him, but he moved with a desperation I recognized. I followed him, my legs burning from the effort. Just as we rounded a corner, the sound of the creature stopped, like it had disappeared into thin air. We collapsed in a small alcove, the walls of the canyon providing some shelter. The hiker looked worse than I'd imagined. His face was pale, eyes wide with terror, and his leg, well, let's just say something had gotten to him. I couldn't tell if he was going to make it. "What the hell was that thing?" I asked, not really expecting an answer. He just shook his head, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "It's been following me for hours, killed my friend," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't know what to say. There was no rational explanation for what we'd just seen. No words could make sense of it. We stayed there for what felt like hours, though it was probably just minutes. Eventually, I helped him to his feet, and we limped our way back toward the entrance of the canyon. The creature didn't follow us again, and I wasn't sure if that made me feel better or worse. It was like it had decided to let us go, for now. When we finally made it out of the canyon, I radioed Lisa. She sounded relieved to hear from me, but I didn't tell her what had happened. I couldn't. There was no way to explain it without sounding insane. The hiker was taken to the hospital, but he didn't say much after that. Whatever he had seen, or whatever had gotten his friend, left him broken. I never saw him again, and the incident was quietly brushed under the rug. Just another lost hiker in the desert. Nothing to see here. But I knew better. I don't believe in the supernatural, but that thing wasn't natural either. Whatever it was still out there, lurking in the canyons, waiting for its next victim. In the end, I guess the joke's on me. Turns out I really should have stuck with real estate. At least there, the only predators you face are overzealous clients. But I've got a new rule now: stay out of the damn dunes. In 2001, I was about 6 years into my job as a park ranger at Isle Royale National Park, right off Michigan's coast in Lake Superior. Not exactly the kind of place you just stumble upon, unless you were running from something like me. Yeah, I left behind more than a few things. I guess when you burn enough bridges, the only place left is an island. My name's Owen McCrae, and I'd been living alone in a ranger cabin for nearly 3 years by then. The remoteness suited me. People talk too much anyway, and most of them think they know everything about your life after a single conversation. I wasn't running from anything dramatic. No mob or ex-wife, just bad choices, a failed business, and a bunch of unpaid bills. You know, the usual small-time screw-ups that you can't shake once they pile up. This place had wolves and moose for neighbors, and I didn't mind. If a wolf comes after you, it's because you're in its territory, not because it's gossiping about how you used to be a failure. I like that about them. Predictable. Unlike people. On that day, we got a call over the radio. Well, not exactly a call. More like static and panicked shouting, then silence. One of the seasonal hikers who'd come in for a week-long camping trip with his wife and a buddy. They weren't supposed to leave their campsite for another 2 days, but something was clearly wrong. Of course, nobody else was close enough to go check it out. The park's wilderness stretched across over 200 square miles, with only a handful of us on duty. And like some twisted cosmic joke, I was the closest one. I threw on my boots, grabbed my gear, and set out. Took me a few hours to hike out to their site. There was something off about the woods that day. Call it instinct or paranoia, but I could feel it. The birds weren't chirping, no rustling from the usual small critters darting through the underbrush. Just stillness. The kind that makes you feel like someone's staring at the back of your neck. Their campsite wasn't much of a camp anymore when I arrived. The tent was shredded, the fire pit overturned, food scattered everywhere. No sign of the people who were supposed to be there. I took out my radio and tried to reach them. Nothing. Tried the park office. Nothing. It was almost like whatever had been there didn't want me getting help. I thought back to the rumors. Locals, mostly the few old-timers left on the mainland, liked to tell tales of something else on the island. Something that didn't fit into the neat categories of predator and prey. But then again, locals love their tall tales. I used to chalk it up to booze, boredom, or too many nights alone under the stars. I spotted blood near the tent. Not a lot, but enough to suggest someone got hurt. I started tracking it, a thin smear leading deeper into the trees. It wasn't until I heard the scream, a scream I'll never forget, that I knew whatever I was tracking wasn't just some ordinary animal attack. The sound made the hair on my arm stand up. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was fear. Pure, primal fear. And it was coming from up ahead. I don't know what I expected to find, but I sure as hell didn't expect the scene that greeted me. The man, Doug, according to the visitor logs, was half-dragged across the ground, his leg caught in some kind of bizarre trap. Not like a bear trap. This was crude, made of jagged wood and metal scraps, something a person would have built, not a machine. Doug was barely conscious, his breath ragged and his eyes wild as he caught sight of me. He muttered something. It got them. It took them. Over and over, like a scratched record stuck on the same groove. His buddy and wife were nowhere to be found, and judging by the way the campsite had been torn apart, I wasn't sure I wanted to find them. But here's the kicker. What dragged Doug wasn't a human being. It wasn't even an animal I could place. There were prints leading away from the trap, long and deep in the dirt. Clawed, but not like a wolf or a bear. Something about the spacing felt wrong, too. It walked on two legs, but wasn't man-shaped. Too heavy for that, too deliberate. At that moment, it was like everything I'd shrugged off. All the whispers, the stories from the old-timers rushed into my mind. I don't believe in monsters, not the kind that live under your bed anyway. But whatever did this, it didn't belong in any ranger's manual. I couldn't just leave Doug, though. I tried to pull him free, but the trap was buried too deep, and with every tug, his screams got worse. Not exactly the sound you want to echo through an empty forest when you know something's still out there. I told him to shut up, to calm down. I told him I'd come back with help, but I never got that chance. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, lumbering between the trees, just beyond the edge of the clearing. A shape that didn't make sense. Too tall, too thick, moving with a deliberate, almost mechanical gait. And then I realized it was watching me. When I turned fully to face it, it stopped, like it was sizing me up, trying to decide if I was a threat or the next course. Its face, or at least what I could make out in the dappled light, was a twisted combination of features that didn't belong together. Like someone had mixed the head of a giant bear with that of a gorilla, but stretched and wrong. Its snout protruded awkwardly, and tufts of patchy fur stuck out at odd angles. One hand, or paw, whatever you want to call it, clutched a large, pointed bone, almost like a spear. Before I could do anything, the thing let out a breath, a low, heavy exhale that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath me. It didn't charge. It didn't need to. Doug's eyes had gone wide, his frantic whispers turning to panicked breaths. I don't know what snapped in me. Maybe it was survival instinct, or maybe I'm just a coward, but I grabbed my rifle and fired. One shot. I'm not even sure it hit. The creature didn't flinch, didn't stagger back, it just stood there. And that's when I realized the gun wasn't going to help. I backed away slowly, pulling Doug as far as I could, though he was barely moving now. The thing was still watching, still deciding. I don't think it cared about us, not really. It was like we were trespassing, like we were part of some game it played when the tourists came around. At that point, Doug started coughing up blood. It was bad, real bad. I muttered something about going to get help, told him to hang on. He said something about his wife and his buddy again, but I could barely hear him. And just like that, Doug was gone. I don't know why, but the creature didn't come after me. I ran, didn't look back. I know, heroic, right? Doug's body was found the next day by another ranger, and the rest of them never turned up. I filed my report, wrote it off as an animal attack. But what kind of animal traps humans and drags them away like some macabre game? What kind of animal watches you with something like curiosity while it decides whether to rip you apart? The ranger service decided not to ask too many questions. Too many accidents like this had happened over the years, but let's just say they weren't eager to put the park in any brochures after that. Last I heard, they pulled Doug's body back to the mainland, left it for the state police. No one's claimed to have seen the thing since, but I haven't exactly been checking, so that's it. The great lesson I learned? You can run from debt collectors and failed relationships, but there's no running from whatever's out there, especially when it's smarter than you. There's a peculiar kind of silence you only find deep in the woods, the kind that makes you question whether you've ever truly heard quiet before. My name is Garrett Thompson, and back in 2015, I was stationed as a park ranger in the vast stretches of the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. I'd always found solace among the trees, perhaps because they don't judge you for being a man of few words. After a decade in the Marines, I thought trading deserts and mountains for forests would be a peaceful shift. I believed being a park ranger would be like early retirement, a chance to swap my rifle for a radio and my helmet for a wide-brimmed hat. Most days, that's exactly what it was. I'd patrol the trails, guide the occasional lost hiker back to the path, and spend my evenings reading by the campfire. I even had a running joke with my colleague Linda that the most dangerous thing in these woods was the coffee in the station's break room. But one autumn day, all of that changed. It was late October, the kind of day where the leaves had turned to a fiery palette of reds and oranges, and the air carried that crisp scent of impending winter. I was assigned to check out a report of illegal hunting in the northern quadrant of the park, a place we locals called the Deep Green because of its dense canopy. Linda was supposed to join me, but she called in sick with the flu. "Don't have too much fun without me," she'd joked over the phone. Heading out alone wasn't unusual for me. Solitude had its perks. No small talk, no distractions, just me in the forest. I grabbed my gear, radio, map, first aid kit, and for once I decided to take the old Winchester rifle from the equipment locker. Regulations allowed us to carry firearms when investigating potential poaching. Better safe than sorry, I thought. As I made my way deeper into the deep green, I noticed the usual sounds of the forest seemed muted. No bird song, no rustling of small critters in the underbrush. It reminded me of the quiet before a storm, that eerie stillness that raises the hairs on the back of your neck. I shrugged it off, blaming it on the changing seasons. About an hour into my hike, I came across something that made me stop in my tracks. An abandoned campsite. The tent was shredded, sleeping bags torn apart, and supplies scattered everywhere. It looked like a tornado had touched down on that very spot. But there were no tornadoes in this part of Pennsylvania. I radioed back to the station. "Control, this is Garrett. I found a vandalized campsite at grid reference D16. No sign of occupants." Static answered me. Great. The radio was on the fritz again. I made a mental note to give Linda an "I told you so" about budget cuts affecting our equipment. Without communication, I decided to investigate further. There were footprints leading away from the campsite, erratic, as if whoever made them was running. They were deep impressions suggesting someone carrying weight or moving in panic. I followed them, the forest growing denser with each step. Then I found the first body. It was a man, probably in his mid-30s. His clothes were torn and his body, well, let's just say I'd seen less gruesome scenes on the battlefield. Deep lacerations crisscrossed his torso, and his face was frozen in a grimace of sheer terror. I'd seen death before, but this was something else. I checked for a pulse out of protocol, knowing full well there wouldn't be one. I tried the radio again. "Control, this is Garrett. I have a deceased male at grid reference D18, possible animal attack. Request immediate backup." Again, just static. I needed to get back and report this, but something compelled me to push on. Maybe it was the footprints leading further into the woods, or maybe it was the sense of duty ingrained in me from years of service. About 50 yards ahead, I found a second body, a woman this time. Same gruesome injuries, same look of abject horror. I'd seen enough. This wasn't the work of any animal native to these parts. Cougars hadn't been seen here in decades, and black bears didn't attack humans unprovoked. I decided to head back, but as I turned around, I heard a sound that chilled me to the bone. It was a low, resonant noise like the distant rumble of thunder, but the sky was clear. I gripped the rifle tighter, scanning the tree line. Then I saw it. At first glance, it looked like a massive wolverine, but standing upright on hind legs, towering at least 7 feet tall. I blinked, thinking my eyes were deceiving me. I'd never seen anything like it. Its fur was matted and dark, patches missing to reveal taut, sinewy muscle beneath. Its claws were long and sharp, glinting even in the dim light filtering through the canopy. It stared in my direction, head tilted as if sizing me up. My training kicked in. I raised the rifle, aiming center mass. I didn't want to shoot, but whatever this thing was, it had already killed 2 people. I shouted, "Stay back!" It responded by baring a set of teeth that would make a grizzly bear seem friendly. I fired a warning shot into the air. The creature didn't flinch, instead it charged. Time seemed to slow down. I fired again, this time aiming at the creature. The bullet hit it square in the shoulder, but it only seemed to anger it. It closed the distance faster than I thought possible. I dove to the side as it swiped at me, its claws tearing through the fabric of my jacket and grazing my skin. The pain was sharp, but adrenaline kept me moving. I scrambled to my feet, pumping another round into the chamber. I fired again, hitting it in the leg. This time it stumbled, giving me a precious few seconds. I ran. I'd never run so fast in my life, dodging between trees, leaping over roots. The forest that I'd found so comforting now felt like a maze designed to trap me. I could hear it crashing through the underbrush behind me. Desperate, I spotted a narrow crevice between 2 large boulders. I squeezed myself into it, the rocks scraping against my back. Holding my breath, I waited. I could hear it approaching, sniffing the air. It let out another one of those unsettling sounds, somewhere between a roar and a snarl. It was so close I could smell its rancid breath, a mix of decay and raw meat. It clawed at the entrance of the crevice, but its bulk prevented it from reaching me. I knew I couldn't stay there forever. I needed a plan. Then I remembered the flare gun in my pack. With shaky hands, I pulled it out. If I could distract it long enough, maybe I could make a run for it. I fired the flare in the opposite direction. The sudden burst of light startled the creature. It turned toward the flare, giving me the opening I needed. I bolted from the crevice, running in the direction I hoped was back toward the station. My lungs burned, legs felt like lead, but I didn't dare slow down. Behind me, I could hear it giving chase again. Breaking through the tree line, I spotted the old fire lookout tower. If I could get inside and barricade the door, maybe I could call for help. I dashed up the stairs 2 at a time, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it and pushed a heavy cabinet in front of it. Searching the room, I found the old radio equipment. With a silent prayer, I flipped the switch. The static crackled, then a voice came through. "This is Ranger Station Alpha. Identify yourself." "This is Garrett Thompson. I'm at the old lookout tower near the deep green. I need immediate assistance. There's something out here. 2 civilians are dead. Copy that, Garrett. Hold tight. We're sending a team to your location." Just then, the entire tower shook. The creature was ramming itself against the supports. Wood creaked and groaned under the assault. I could see it from the window, circling the base, searching for a way up. I wasn't safe yet. An idea struck me. The tower had an old fuel tank used for the generator. If I could ignite it, maybe I could take the creature out. I grabbed a spare length of rope and secured it to the railing. Tying the other end around my waist, I prepared to rappel down the opposite side of the tower. It was a risky move, but staying put wasn't an option. I descended as quietly as possible. Once on the ground, I moved swiftly to the fuel tank. I opened the valve, letting the gasoline spill out, creating a slick trail leading toward the base of the tower. Taking a deep breath, I lit a match and dropped it onto the fuel. Flames erupted, racing along the ground. The creature turned toward the sudden blaze. For a moment it seemed confused. Then the fire reached the tank. The explosion was deafening. The force knocked me off my feet. Debris flew in all directions. When the dust settled, the tower was engulfed in flames, and the creature was nowhere to be seen. Sirens wailed in the distance. Backup was finally arriving. I sat there covered in dirt and ash as the first responders pulled up. They asked questions, but I had no answers that would make sense. They found the bodies of the two hikers. An investigation ensued, but no trace of the creature was ever found. Official reports labeled it a tragic accident due to a rogue animal. Protocols were updated, and the area was marked as off-limits pending further investigation. Back at the station, Linda returned from her sick leave. "Leave it to you to turn a routine patrol into a fireworks show," she quipped. "Just trying to keep things interesting," I replied. She smirked. "Next time, maybe warn me before you decide to remodel the forest." "I'll pencil it in," I said with a shrug. Work continued as usual. The incident became something of an urban legend among the rangers. Some believed my story, others thought I'd spent too much time alone in the woods. Either way, the forest seemed a little different after that. Life at the park returned to its regular rhythm. Hikers came and went, the leaves changed and fell, and the winter snow blanketed the deep green. The memory of that day lingered at the edge of my mind, but there was always work to be done. One afternoon, Linda handed me a mug of the station's notorious coffee. "Here's to hoping this is the scariest thing you faced today," she said with a grin. I took a sip and grimaced. "It's a close call," I joked. "By the way, the guys have a new nickname for you," she added. "Do I want to know?" "Tower Inferno." I chuckled. Could be worse. At least they didn't go with Smokey's nemesis. She laughed. "Give it time." And so the days went on. The forest kept its secrets and I kept doing my job. After all, someone has to make sure the coffee doesn't get any stronger. Rainy nights have always given me an eerie feeling. It was one such night when I had an encounter that still haunts me. The relentless downpour was like a constant drumming on the roof, creating an atmosphere of solitude that I usually found comforting. But this night, it was different. I had just finished a long day at work and was heading home, my windshield wipers swaying back and forth, battling the heavy rain. The streets were nearly empty, and the faint glow of the streetlights cast long, distorted shadows. My car's tires splashed through puddles as I navigated the slick roads. As I approached a desolate stretch of road, I noticed a figure up ahead. A solitary man, drenched by the rain, was standing by the side of the road, his thumb outstretched. It was a scene I'd encountered before, a hitchhiker seeking refuge from the rain. However, something about this man made my heart race. His clothes were disheveled, and his face was obscured by the hood of his tattered jacket. I couldn't see his features. I could feel his eyes on me as I approached. A sudden chill coursed through my body as I slowed down and came to a stop. Against my better judgment, I rolled down the window. The man leaned closer, his hood still obscuring his face. "Could you give me a lift?" he asked, his voice shaky, as if he were drenched not only in rain but in fear. I hesitated, my instincts warning me that something was off. "Where are you headed?" I finally asked. He hesitated too, and then replied, "Just a few miles down the road." "Anywhere you can drop me would be fine." I decided to trust my gut and reluctantly unlocked the car doors. He climbed into the passenger seat, his wet clothes soaking the upholstery, and the car was immediately filled with a musty, damp odor. As we continued down the rain-soaked road, the atmosphere in the car grew increasingly tense. The only sound was the relentless pitter-patter of rain on the roof. I attempted small talk, asking the man about his day, but he responded with vague and evasive answers. A sense of unease crept over me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. My grip on the steering wheel tightened as I contemplated what to do. I noticed his hands. They were trembling uncontrollably, and my suspicion deepened. As we approached the supposed drop-off point, I decided it was time to end this unsettling journey. I pulled over to the side of the road and turned to the man. "This is as far as I can take you," I said, my voice trembling slightly. He didn't respond but continued to stare ahead, his hood still obscuring his face. I felt a chill run down my spine as I reached for the door handle, ready to ask him to leave. That's when he finally turned his head slowly in my direction. His face, illuminated by the dim car interior light, was like nothing I'd ever seen. His eyes were hollow and devoid of emotion, his skin ashen and translucent. His mouth twisted into a grotesque smile, revealing rows of jagged, yellow teeth. My heart pounded in my chest, and my instinct screamed at me to get out of there. With a surge of adrenaline, I flung open the car door and bolted out into the pouring rain. I didn't look back, but I could hear the man's unsettling laughter echoing through the night. I ran to the nearest house, pounded on the door, and begged the startled homeowner to call the police. It was only then, in the safety of a stranger's home, that I began to comprehend the gravity of what had just happened. The police arrived promptly, and they conducted a search of the area, but the man had vanished into the rainy night. They assured me that they would do everything they could to locate him, but they could offer no explanation for the encounter or the man's disturbing appearance. This happened to me around 4 years ago now. I was driving alone in my old beat-up sedan. I had received an urgent call from my dad, who needed a ride from a nearby town. It was past midnight, and the road was dark and eerily quiet. As I sped along the deserted highway, my mind drifted to my dad's situation. He rarely asked for help, so it must have been something serious. The tension built up inside me as I contemplated the unknown. Suddenly, a pair of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, rapidly approaching. The car behind me was tailgating dangerously, and I couldn't make out its make or model. Anxiety surged through me as I glanced at my speedometer. I was already driving above the limit. I switched lanes, hoping the aggressive driver would pass me, but they followed suit. Panic gnawed at me as I realized this wasn't just a careless tailgater, it was someone with malicious intent. My heart raced, and I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. As the menacing vehicle continued to shadow me, my mind raced through possible explanations. Maybe it was a road rage incident, or perhaps they were trying to carjack me. Regardless of the reason, I knew I had to act. I attempted to put some distance between us by accelerating, but the driver behind me matched my speed, inching closer with every second. Fear coursed through my veins as I considered my next move. Up ahead, I spotted a well-lit gas station, a beacon of hope in the inky darkness. I made the split-second decision to make a run for it. As I approached the entrance, I prayed that someone would be there to witness what was happening. I swung into the gas station, tires screeching, and rushed out of my car. My heart pounded in my chest as I sprinted toward the store, frantically searching for anyone who could help. The gas station attendant was outside, taking a break. I yelled, "Call the police. Someone's chasing me." Without hesitation, the attendant grabbed his phone and dialed 911. I explained the situation, my voice trembling, and he assured me that help was on the way. As we waited for the police, I watched the menacing car slow down and circle the gas station, its headlights illuminating my desperate face. The driver's intent was clear. They weren't going to let me escape so easily. When the police arrived, they quickly surrounded the aggressor's vehicle, guns drawn. The driver was apprehended, and I breathed a sigh of relief. As it turned out, the person behind the wheel was a complete stranger, their motive still a mystery. They were arrested and taken into custody, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me. I finally picked up my dad, who was equally baffled by the chilling encounter. We drove home together, our conversation filled with questions and unease. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind kept replaying the events on that desolate highway. I had narrowly escaped a terrifying encounter with a stranger whose intentions I would never fully understand. Me and my buddy, Mark, decided to escape to the woods for a weekend camping trip. We needed a break from our busy lives in the city. It was supposed to be a fun adventure, just the two of us reconnecting with nature. We set up our tent deep in the heart of the forest, away from any trails or other campers. The night was quiet, with only the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hooting of an owl. We had just finished roasting marshmallows over the campfire, laughing and reminiscing about old times, when we heard a faint rustling outside our tent. Mark and I exchanged glances, thinking it might be a raccoon or a deer. But this wasn't your typical forest noise. The rustling grew louder, more deliberate, and then we heard a voice. It was a low, almost inaudible whisper, like someone muttering just outside the tent. My heart pounded as I strained to make out the words. "Let me in." Mark and I froze, our flashlights poised to reveal the intruder. We asked who it was, but the voice didn't respond. It just kept repeating the same eerie phrase, "Let me in." Mark unzipped the tent slowly, revealing the silhouette of a man standing a few feet away. He was tall and dressed in tattered clothes. His face was hidden in the shadows. "Let me in," he whispered again, his voice tinged with an odd mix of desperation and menace. We were unnerved but decided to help him. Maybe he was lost or in trouble. Mark unzipped the tent further, and the stranger stepped inside. His appearance was unsettling. His clothes were filthy, and his eyes darted around nervously. We asked him if he was okay, but he didn't respond. Instead, he just stood there, staring at us with an unnerving intensity. The atmosphere grew tense, and Mark and I exchanged uneasy glances. Suddenly, the stranger's gaze fixated on me. He leaned in close, his breath hot on my neck. "Let me in," he hissed, and I recoiled in fear. That's when I noticed it, a knife clutched tightly in his hand. It gleamed ominously in the dim light, and I knew we were in great danger. Mark and I exchanged a look of sheer terror. Without a word, we lunged at the tent flap, pushing our way past the intruder. We sprinted through the woods, not daring to look back, our hearts pounding as we left the campsite behind. As we finally reached our car, the memory of that eerie whisper and the glint of that knife continued to haunt us. We didn't know what the stranger's intentions were, and we had no desire to find out. The camping trip had taken a dark turn, and it was a chilling encounter we would never forget. I live in a quiet suburban area, where the days usually pass by without much excitement. But one evening, that changed. I was home alone, finishing up some work on my laptop when I heard a knock on the door. It was already quite late, and I wasn't expecting any visitors. I peeked through the peephole and saw a man standing there, holding a clipboard and wearing what looked like a company badge. I cautiously opened the door, and he introduced himself as a surveyor conducting a neighborhood survey. He seemed professional at first, explaining that he needed a few minutes of my time to ask some questions about the local community. I obliged, thinking it wouldn't take long. As the conversation progressed, his questions became increasingly personal, delving into details about my daily routine, my neighbors, and even the security measures in my home. It felt intrusive, but I tried to maintain a polite demeanor. Yet, something about his probing questions and intense stare sent shivers down my spine. I tried to steer the conversation back to general topics, but he persisted, getting too close for comfort, invading my personal space. His inquiries started sounding more like prying interrogations, and his demeanor turned from friendly to unnerving. I grew increasingly uncomfortable, feeling a sense of unease and vulnerability. I made excuses to end the conversation, but he persisted, refusing to leave. He started making veiled threats, hinting at dire consequences if I didn't comply with his inquiries. My heart raced as I realized the situation had taken a dangerous turn. I attempted to close the door, but he forcibly blocked it, his demeanor now aggressive and menacing. Fear surged through me, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I knew I had to get him to leave, so I tried to assertively demand that he go. But he wouldn't budge. His tone became more threatening, his words a mix of intimidation and coercion. I felt trapped in my own home, powerless against this stranger's invasion of my space and privacy. With each passing moment, my fear intensified. I tried to keep a level head, not wanting to provoke him further, but the situation was spiraling out of control. My thoughts raced, considering my options, feeling a sense of desperation and vulnerability. In a moment of panic, I fumbled for my phone, ready to dial emergency services. But his sudden movement startled me. He lunged forward, attempting to force his way in. I stumbled back, locking the door just in time. The sound of him pounding on the door echoed through the house, his voice rising in anger and threats. I could hear his demands to be let in, promising consequences if I didn't comply. It was a nightmare unfolding before my eyes, and I felt utterly helpless. I quickly called emergency services, explaining the situation in frantic words, my voice trembling with fear. As I waited for help to arrive, I barricaded myself in a room, feeling the weight of terror bearing down on me. Every sound outside the door sent shivers down my spine. Every passing second felt like an eternity. The arrival of the police was a wave of relief, but the man had vanished into the night by the time they arrived. I explained what had happened, but without any identification or clear information, there wasn't much they could do. The incident left me shaking to the core. I installed extra security measures, checked the locks multiple times a day, and avoided answering the door to unexpected visitors. The sense of violation lingered long after that night, the fear of an unknown threat lurking in the safety of my home. I couldn't shake off the feeling of vulnerability, knowing that sometimes the scariest encounters are not with supernatural entities but with the unsettling intentions of people. It was a night of terror that made me question the sanctity of my home, leaving me haunted by the chilling reminder that danger could come knocking when least expected. The night was unusually dark, and my friends and I were driving back from a long road trip. We decided to take a break at a rest stop, just to stretch our legs and grab a quick snack. The place looked deserted, just a few dimly lit lampposts casting eerie shadows. As we pulled into the lot, there was this uncanny silence, an unsettling absence of any noise. I attributed it to the late hour, thinking everyone must be asleep. But there was something about that silence that sent a chill down my spine. We stepped out of the car, and that's when I noticed it. The atmosphere felt off, heavy with an unspoken dread. The usual bustle of a rest stop was missing. No chatter, no cars coming and going, just this unsettling stillness. We walked towards the vending machines, hoping to find something to snack on, but they were empty. Not a single snack left, not even a packet of chips. It felt odd, as if the place was abandoned in a hurry. My friend pointed out a small building nearby, probably the restroom. We hesitated but decided to check it out. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior. The flickering lights made the place seem almost haunting. The restroom was in shambles, the stalls were broken, and the sinks were stained. It looked like it hadn't been cleaned in ages. The air was musty, with a hint of something rotten. We decided to leave, the atmosphere too unnerving to linger. As we made our way back to the car, we noticed a figure standing at the edge of the lot, just beyond the reach of the lamplight. It was unnaturally still, almost blending into the darkness. I couldn't make out any features, just this ominous silhouette. We hurriedly got into the car, trying to shake off the unease creeping over us. But then the headlights flickered, and the engine sputtered. Panic set in as the car wouldn't start. It was as if something sinister was at play. My friend tried the radio, hoping to hear some music, something to break the eerie silence. But all we got was static, a harsh, grating sound that seemed to amplify the sense of impending doom. That figure we had seen earlier, it was closer now, just beyond the edge of the light. I could feel this growing sense of dread, a knot forming in my stomach. I wanted to leave, to get away from this place, but the car remained stubbornly still. We tried to call for help, but our phones had no signal, no bars whatsoever. The isolation of the rest stop felt suffocating, like we were trapped in a nightmare. Then, the figure started moving towards us, slow, deliberate steps. My heart raced as I realized we were in danger. There was something about its movement, this unhurried, calculated approach that sent shivers down my spine. We were trapped, sitting ducks in a deserted rest stop in the dead of night. Fear washed over us, and time seemed to stretch endlessly. We locked the doors, but that figure, it didn't seem affected. It kept getting closer, its features still hidden in the shadows. My mind raced, trying to rationalize the situation, to find a way out of this nightmare. Suddenly, the figure stopped, just inches away from the car. I could feel its presence, this oppressive force looming over us. It was as if it was studying us, observing our fear. I wanted to scream, to break free from this paralysis gripping me, but fear rendered me speechless. My friends were just as petrified, silent, and wide-eyed. And then, the figure turned and vanished into the darkness. The car started, the engine mooring to life. We wasted no time, speeding away from that rest stop. I was working the night shift, monitoring security cameras in this remote facility. It was one of those places that felt desolate even during the day, and at night, it seemed to become a different world altogether. I kept an eye on the screens, watching for any unusual activities, knowing I was the only one on duty. Everything was quiet until I noticed movement in one of the isolated areas on the cameras. It was supposed to be vacant, miles away from the main complex. At first, I dismissed it as a glitch or maybe an animal wandering around. But then, I saw it again, a shadowy figure lurking at the edge of the frame. I leaned closer, squinting at the screen, trying to make out details. The figure was hunched over, moving slowly and deliberately. My heart quickened. There was something unnerving about the way it moved. I switched to a different camera to get a closer look, but the figure had vanished. I scanned the area, feeling a sense of unease creeping over me. Everything appeared quiet and undisturbed. But then, there it was again, a fleeting glimpse of movement, as if someone was deliberately avoiding the cameras. I focused all my attention on that area, feeling a growing sense of dread. Shadows danced across the screens, and my imagination started to play tricks on me. I was jumpy, convinced I was being watched from somewhere beyond those lenses. I picked up the radio to call for backup or alert someone, but static filled the airwaves. Panic clawed at me, realizing that I was truly alone in this isolated post with whatever was out there. The figure appeared again on one of the screens, closer this time, lingering just at the edge of the camera's range. My heart hammered in my chest as I decided to take action. I grabbed a flashlight and a bat, trying to quell my rising fear. I knew I had to investigate, despite every instinct screaming at me to stay put. Stepping outside, the air was thick with silence, broken only by the sound of my footsteps echoing in the darkness. I navigated towards the area the figure had been spotted, my flashlight casting eerie shadows as I moved cautiously. The tension in the air was palpable, and I could feel my skin prickling with unease. The surroundings seemed almost alive, as if they were hiding something sinister. I reached the area but found nothing except for abandoned equipment and the rustling of leaves in the wind. I swept the flashlight around, scanning every corner, but there was no sign of anyone or anything. Just the vast emptiness of the night. Doubt crept in. Was I imagining things? Was it a trick of the light or exhaustion playing tricks on my mind? I decided to head back, feeling a mixture of relief and lingering apprehension. But as I turned to leave, I caught a movement out of the corner of my eye. I swung the flashlight towards it, illuminating a dark figure standing just a few feet away. My breath caught in my throat as I faced the figure, feeling a cold chill run down my spine. The person, or whatever it was, stood completely still, staring at me with piercing eyes that seemed to glint in the light. I stumbled backward, my heart racing in terror. I tried to call out, but words failed me. There was something off about this figure, a sense of otherness that sent shivers down my spine. Before I could react or make sense of the situation, the figure turned and vanished into the darkness. I stood there, trembling, my mind racing with 1,000 questions and a primal fear that gnawed at my core. I hurried back to the security office, locking the door behind me, and I reached for the radio again, desperate for any connection. But the static persisted, refusing to yield to my pleas for help. I stayed in that room, watching the monitors, expecting that figure to reappear, but there was nothing. No signs of movement, no hint of the unsettling presence I had witnessed. As the night wore on, I tried to shake off the fear, rationalizing it as fatigue or perhaps a mind playing tricks. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something inexplicable had occurred. When morning finally broke, I was exhausted and on edge, but I was also relieved to see the light of day. I reported what had happened to my supervisor, but the reaction was dismissive, a suggestion that it was likely an animal or my imagination. But I knew what I had seen. It wasn't a trick of the light or a mere illusion. There was something out there, something unexplainable and chilling, lurking in the darkness of that remote area. And that experience would haunt me for a long time to come, leaving me with an unshakable fear of what could exist beyond our understanding. I was driving late at night with a couple of friends, and we needed to refuel, so we spotted this gas station off the highway. It looked alright from a distance, but as we pulled in closer, things started to feel off. The station was eerily quiet, no signs of life around. I thought maybe it was just late, that they closed up early, but something about it didn't sit right. We needed gas, so we decided to check it out. Pulling up to the pumps, we realized there were no cars, no attendants, just an eerie silence. I tried to shrug it off, maybe it was just a slow night for them. But as I got out of the car, this shiver ran down my spine. It was too quiet, too still. The place looked old, worn down. Lights flickered above us, casting these unsettling shadows around. We walked towards the building, thinking someone might be inside, but the door creaked open as if it hadn't been touched in years. The inside was even more unsettling, dusty shelves, old magazines scattered, a layer of neglect everywhere. I called out, but there was no response. It was this eerie silence that sent a chill down my spine. We decided to grab what we needed and leave. But as we were about to head out, strange things started happening. The lights flickered more erratically, and we heard these odd creaks, like someone moving in the shadows. I felt this knot in my stomach, this sense of danger that I couldn't explain. I thought maybe it was just our nerves, playing tricks on us in this abandoned place. But then, things got weirder. Items on the shelf started moving on their own, falling off with no one near them. It was like the place had a life of its own, and it wasn't a friendly one. I felt this sense of impending doom, this urgency to get out, but we needed gas. As we made our way back to the pumps, the lights flickered faster, and this feeling of being watched settled over us. We hurried, trying to fuel up, but the pump didn't seem to be working, no gas flowing. That's when we heard it, the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from inside the station. We froze, exchanging terrified looks. We were alone, or so we thought. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but there was no response. The footsteps continued, getting closer. Panic started to set in. We needed to leave, now. We ran to the car, this sense of urgency dragging us. I fumbled with the keys, trying to start the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. My heart raced as I kept trying, the sound of those footsteps getting louder. Finally, the car roared to life, and we peeled out of there, leaving that eerie gas station behind us. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and I saw figures standing in the shadows of the station, watching us leave. It was this inexplicable encounter at that supposedly functional gas station that left us shaken, with this lingering fear that something sinister lurked within those abandoned walls. I took a babysitting job for a wealthy family, thinking it'd be an easy way to make some extra money. The house was grand, but something about it felt imposing, as if its walls held untold stories. The man of the house had made his fortune in the textile industry, and the air in the house carried an aura of opulence mixed with an unsettling tension. The kids were in bed, and I was in the living room, flipping through a magazine when I heard a loud crash, followed by voices shouting. Fear gripped me as I realized the sounds were coming from inside the house. Armed individuals burst in, their faces obscured by masks. They were shouting demands, asking for something the family didn't possess. I was frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. They herded us into a room, holding us hostage, me, the kids, and the parents. The air was thick with tension and fear. The parents tried to reason with the intruders, pleading for our safety, but the masked individuals seemed driven by something beyond reason. They were aggressive, threatening violence if their demands weren't met. The parents insisted they didn't have what the intruders were looking for, but the armed individuals didn't believe them. I felt powerless, helpless, as if the walls of the room were closing in on us. The children were terrified, clinging to their parents, and I tried my best to keep them calm, to reassure them that everything would be okay. But deep down, I was terrified too. The desperation in the intruders' voices, their menacing demeanor, it was clear they were willing to do anything to get what they wanted. Hours dragged by, the tension in the room escalating with each passing moment. I could hear the kids whimpering softly, their fear palpable. The intruders grew impatient, their threats turning more severe. They demanded immediate compliance or else they would take drastic measures. I felt a surge of fear, knowing that our lives were hanging by a thread. The parents were frantic, trying to negotiate, but it seemed futile. The intruders were unrelenting. Suddenly, a commotion outside drew the intruders' attention. There were sirens, flashing lights, a police presence outside the house. The intruders panicked, realizing they were surrounded. In the chaos, they grabbed what they could and fled, leaving us shaken and terrified. The sound of their hurried footsteps fading away felt like a lifeline. The police arrived and secured the house. They questioned us, and the parents explained that they didn't possess what the intruders were demanding. It seemed like a case of mistaken identity or a botched robbery. As the police conducted their investigation, I couldn't shake off the feeling of terror. The memory of those masked individuals, their aggression, a fear of not knowing if they'd return, it lingered like a nightmare. We were fortunate to come out physically unharmed, but the psychological trauma stayed with us. It was a night of terror, a stark reminder of the vulnerability that comes with simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The safety and security I took for granted shattered within those few hours, leaving behind a haunting experience I wish I could forget. It was getting late, and fatigue was creeping in as I navigated through the dimly lit streets. Then, I saw this figure at the side of the road, a hitchhiker with their thumb out. I felt this pang of sympathy, this desire to help someone in need. So, I pulled over, thinking I could offer a ride and some assistance. The hitchhiker seemed harmless enough, this weary-looking person with a backpack. I thought maybe they were just down on their luck, needing a lift to the next town. I felt this urge to help, this sense of doing a good deed. They got in, thanking me for stopping. We exchanged a few pleasantries, but as the ride went on, I noticed something was off. There was this uneasiness in their demeanor, this shifting glance that made me uneasy. I tried to engage in small talk, to ease the tension, but they seemed distant, almost evasive. I felt this growing sense of discomfort, this realization that I might have made a mistake. They asked if I could drop them off at a remote location, far from the main road. I hesitated, but I didn't want to leave them stranded. I felt this tug of war inside, this conflict between wanting to help and this feeling that something wasn't right. As we got closer to the spot they mentioned, this sense of dread washed over me. It was this desolate area, no signs of life around. I felt this overwhelming fear, this realization that I might be in danger. They asked me to pull over, and as I did, they suddenly turned towards me, this menacing look in their eyes. I felt this rush of panic, this fear gripping me. They demanded my belongings, this threatening tone that sent chills down my spine. I tried to reason with them, to talk them out of it, but they were insistent. I tried to hit the gas pedal and escape, but they grabbed onto me, this tight grip that paralyzed me with fear. I felt this suffocating terror, this sense of being completely helpless. They took my belongings and got out, disappearing into the darkness. I sat there, trembling, trying to process what had just happened. I felt this overwhelming shock, this fear of what they might do next. I managed to drive away, this haunting encounter etched in my mind. But the fear lingered, this haunting memory of that chilling experience.